Good afternoon. I'm Dr. John Davison, Chief Executive Officer of the Trust, and I'm glad you're able to join us today for the first webinar in our brand new Business of Practice webinar series. And this webinar is titled Ethical Technology Use in Psychological Practice. Presenting today's webinar is Dr. Sarah Smucker-Barnwell. Dr. Smucker-Barnwell is a member of the Trust Board of Trustees, and you may recognize her if you participated in any of our past telehealth community chats. Dr. Smucker-Barnwell is a clinical psychologist in independent practice. She's a telehealth speaker, author, and consultant, as well as a contributor to national telehealth guidelines and policy. She's also a strong telehealth advocate and enthusiast. We're very fortunate to have her with us today to share her expertise. So I hope you all learn a lot over this next hour, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Smucker-Barnwell.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davison. Thank you to the Trust for having me here today. And thanks so much to everyone for joining. I am delighted to be here with the first of the Trust Business and Practice webinars. As was mentioned earlier today, we're going to talk a bit about ethical technology use in psychological practice. So, as Dr. Davison said, I'm Sarah Smucker-Barnwell. Hi. I'm a clinical psychologist in Seattle, Washington, and I've dedicated my career to the intersection of evidence-based practice and how to expand its access through the ethical use of technology. I've had a fortunate and fun career spanning the gamut of practice environments where we talk about how psychologists may use technology in practice ethically, thoughtfully, and align with our psychological values. So a couple of disclosures. As was mentioned, I am a trustee on the board of the Trust, and I always like to mention that. I'm the host of the telehealth community chats. If you've not had the chance to tune in and join us, I hope you will. And in my professional life, I spend a fair bit of time consulting and training with various entities on themes of telehealth and technology. I'm going to have some diverse learning objectives today. Spend a little bit of time talking about how do we evaluate technology for our practice? How do we think about those key considerations when I'm choosing among technology products? What are some of the challenges, especially in emerging technologies, maybe that are new to us or new to practice? And always how to balance innovation in a rapidly developing area with risk management and making sure that we are thoughtful about those regulations and guidelines unto which we as psychologists are beholden. So today we'll start off with some definitions. We'll talk about those types of technologies that people are most often interested about. And I'm really going to try to take some time to dive into some examples, thinking about what are the sort of a flexible decisional rubric that we may use to help evaluate different products across practice and to decide what's right for your product specifically and idiosyncratically, providing you with criteria that are not just for today, but durable in the future in this area that develops so quickly. We'll close our time together with a little vignette about our colleague, Dr. Spock, who intends to use some technology, and then have some time at the end for some questions and answers. Okay, so diving right in, I'd like to start off with some definitions. This is a very jargon-rich area of practice, I observe. And anytime we're talking about a psychological service facilitated by a psychologist, delivered by a psychologist, facilitated by technology, we're talking about telepsychology. So that really refers to a pretty diverse set of services. Anytime I, as a psychologist, am using technology to deliver care to a client or patient or to collaborate with a colleague, potentially, I am engaged in telepsychology. It's a big tent, and that tent gets larger when we think about the definition of telehealth technologies. Most people I've observed when we talk about telepsychology, they're often thinking of video conferencing or perhaps a mobile application. But really, again, the space is quite large. We're referring to telephone, we're referring to emails or text if we choose to use that in our practice. It's a diverse space. And so I mention it just to give a sense of the breadth of types of technologies we're speaking about today. I also included here just, my own desire to differentiate. Sometimes we're going to talk about mobile apps today, and I always like to distinguish that from digital therapeutics. Many of us may have read about the increasing trend of the FDA approving digital therapeutics, those evidence-based, patient-facing software applications that help a provider prevent or treat or manage a psychiatric disorder or in the larger medical spectrum disease. Between that and when we speak more generically about telehealth technologies and mobile applications. So thank you for being generous and listening to my pet peeve of a differentiating definition. But today we're going to be speaking about all of these technologies. So in the context of the Trust telehealth community chats, as well as other places that I have the chance to speak and talk to psychologists, some frequently asked questions emerge. Those include themes such as, well, what video conferencing product should I use for my practice? If I see one patient that way, if I see all my patients that way, if I want to use an electronic health record or electronic medical record, what are the features I should consider or what should I be looking for? Do I want to communicate asynchronously through email or text or messaging with my clients? And if so, what product should I use? How should I think about that? How about mobile applications? Are those reasonable to use? Or if I want to store my records, not just in a paper filing cabinet, but using the cloud or using some manner of technology, how do I want to think about that? So I thought we would dive into one of these examples and think a little bit about how would I go about making some of these decisions. And again, today, we're not just going to go through and say, well, here's the product that everyone should use, because it's a little problematic to approach it that way. First of all, this is an incredibly fast-paced environment. Second of all, what's right for my practice may not be right for your practice. And importantly, we need to be thinking through what are my own risk tolerances? What are the types of, within the law and within ethical practice, where is my willingness to prioritize ease and convenience over, the highest standards of privacy and confidence? And these are the types of questions we're going to walk through today with some examples. Okay, so let's start off with video conferencing, just because it's one comes up incredibly frequently. So when I'm thinking about a video conferencing product, by way of example, I want to be looking for a product that's designed for healthcare. I'm a healthcare provider, and if I go to look for a video conferencing product, I may observe that the marketplace is absolutely flooded with options, especially after COVID. Many of them may be free and quite easy to use, but they may not be designed for my concerns. As a psychologist, I am an entity that is beholden to HIPAA. I have to be thoughtful about my ethical my ethical code as a psychologist. I have to be thoughtful about the laws of my jurisdiction. So I need a partnership with a company that understands the needs and concerns of healthcare providers. Typically, any healthcare-oriented video conferencing software worth its salt is going to highlight the manner in which it meets my needs. So for example, it's going to be very front and center regarding its attitude towards HIPAA and whether it can comply. And I want to be thoughtful about, well, do they have the features that I as a healthcare provider might need? Perhaps those features are administrative, something like helping me schedule my clients or patients or manage my calendar. Perhaps something like helping me have reminders to my clients regarding when a session might occur, when a meeting might occur. Perhaps a way to collect payment, a way to document that payment and facilitate insurance submission for myself or for the client. Perhaps I need more clinically oriented features, such as templates that help me write my notes or reports, an integrated messaging feature that helps me communicate asynchronously with clients, or perhaps other mechanisms that help me integrate information into a medical chart. And in this area, we're always thinking about what's next. How would a given product think about AI or other emerging technologies that I might be interested in using, but maybe I'm a little tenuous about this, understandably, because I'm not quite sure how to do that and comply with HIPAA. In each of these instances, having a partnership with an entity that is really cognizant of and looking out for these concerns will better position me. We're going to dig into each of these a little bit further. This is just a starter example. But, in any circumstance where we're looking for a product aligned with healthcare, a product that serves healthcare providers, we want to see if they will offer us a business associates agreement. In a moment, we're going to really dig into what are the constituent components of a BAA and where you can find a model if you'd like to have one. But this BAA, broadly speaking, is a contract between myself, a HIPAA-covered entity, as a psychologist, and a vendor partner saying that, okay, well, we understand the needs of someone who has to comply with HIPAA, and we've got this. We've designed our product in compliance with those needs. And we can offer you assurances that we will conduct ourselves in a way conducive to the types of information security, the data privacy that you need in your practice. I want to be thinking through the costs as a healthcare provider. I'm not made of money, so I need to think, can this fit within the budget of my practice? Is this a reasonable cost of doing business? And what other features might they integrate that might actually save me money? Because if I'm paying for, an email product, a text product, a healthcare record product, a video conferencing product, but in fact, there's one product that covers it all with one subscription fee, that may ultimately be a cost savings for me. So I want to think through some of these features. How easy it is to use. This is a really critical feature, and I think so variable. I'm from a very rural community, and actually I'm from a community where folks don't use technology. A lot of my family members are part of the Amish community. Not big on the technology. I now live in Seattle, Washington, where folks are generally very facile with technology. The needs for my community now are quite different for what the best fit would be for my community from home. So in thinking about some of who I serve, where's my level of confidence with these products? Where's the level of confidence with my average customer, my client, my patient? It helps me think through what the right product is going to be, and whether or not that vendor offers the right level of customer support, training, IT, to make sure that this is a good fit. So we're starting off with this example, acknowledging there may not be a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's why I don't just come on to a webinar and say, well, use video conferencing product X because it's the best fit. Because the truth is, we may not know that until we dig a little deeper into an individual practice. These products change. And so this isn't just a one-time assessment, but an ongoing assessment, both because the needs of my practice may change, or because this is a marketplace where the products themselves change. About a year ago, there was a very public and notable circumstance in which I think perhaps the most popular national provider of electronic health records for therapists changed some of their privacy practices. And this made the news and everybody was very upset. And then they backpedaled and said, just kidding. But it was a great example of the manner in which a company may change its policies that in a way that has a direct impact on its appropriateness for a given practice. So this is an ongoing assessment, not just because I might change and my practice might change, but also because this is incredibly fast-paced, fast-moving marketplace. Now, that being said, I'm not saying we're going to change technology products every week, but it is the type of thing where I want to be really thoughtful and paying attention. What might be the right product today may not be the right product a few months from now. And I want to acknowledge also our risk tolerance as practitioners may vary. Now, all of us are bound by regulation, bound by the law, bound by the rules of the jurisdiction in which we practice, and guided by our ethics codes, and as well as our guidelines in our specific areas of practice. However, within those boundaries, an individual's risk tolerance may vary. For example, one psychologist may say, I elect to use asynchronous messaging, email or text or some sort of integrated messaging with my clients because it's convenient. It helps me know what's going on with them. It helps us coordinate our schedules. It's just a risk that's worth the benefits. Another psychologist might very reasonably say, this technology introduces more risk and more sort of potential for problems with data security than I am comfortable with. And I really want to validate that these are reasonable variations, that this really is idiosyncratic, again, within regulation, within the rules, but within that, individuals are going to vary in terms of their risk tolerance and where they in their individual practice land. So today we're going to look at how do I evaluate the appropriateness of a given product? What should I look for? What should I ask for? And what happens when I don't know what I don't know? Because I don't know about you, but that tends to be a sizable bucket for me. So what are those durable guidelines on technology selection that are good not only today, but for 6 months from now when things change again? We're going to talk a little bit today about some of those usual suspects, those usual safeguards that a risk manager or someone like myself who works in technology consulting would suggest. What are some of the practical nuts and bolts aspects of your practice that would dictate what technologies are a good fit and what aren't? And then just thinking a bit about your risk tolerance and where your own risk management needs reside, again, within the boundaries of what is appropriate in your jurisdiction and what is indicated by law. Okay, so let's talk about some of those usual suspects. So again, the standard guidance we'll always give to someone interested in finding a product well aligned for their practice is to select a product that is designed for healthcare. We want to make sure that front and center in this product's marketing, and everything that they offer to you, the consumer, are easily accessible answers to questions relevant for a HIPAA-covered entity. Again, core to this is the provision of a business associates agreement, which in just 2 slides we're going to go through. We want to make sure that those user agreements that they provide us are comprehensible. Do they have language that I can understand? Oftentimes when I'm given a user agreement for some software, it's quite lengthy. It is something that is just pages upon pages long. Sometimes I have the sense that this is designed to intimidate. It's designed to be inaccessible. It's not anticipated that I'm going to read it. I encourage us all to break that mold and, frankly, to partner with companies that provide that information in a consumable, accessible format. Let's not reward bad behavior when possible. So we want to read those agreements and make sure that we understand what we're consenting to. And specifically in those agreements, we're looking for, how do they treat the information that I'm offering? If I'm offering protected health information perhaps about my clients, about my practice, I want to make sure that it's treated appropriately. Where is it stored? Who sees that information? And what happens when I stop using a product? Because, times may change. I may elect to transition to a different technology product. As we just discussed, things may change in my practice or in the space generally. And in those instances, I need to have some assurances that I will be able to safeguard that information, not just today, but in the future. And it's not just left out sort of in the world. Okay. So I wanted to use another example, asynchronous messaging. So when I say asynchronous messaging, I'm referring to any technology we might use to communicate not in real time with our clients. So this might include email, it might include secure messaging that's integrated into an electronic medical record. It may include text, the recorded videos that we may send one another through encrypted channels, any of these. We want to look for, if we're using those usual recommendations, something designed for healthcare. So an easy answer that many psychologists employ are those integrated messaging products that are included in electronic medical records. Many of the large enterprise level products such as Cerner or Epic will have that messaging product where we can message with clients. MyChart, for example, or other large-scale enterprise environments. So we may, as individual practitioners, independent practitioners, need to find a product that works for us. I think oftentimes we encounter folks saying, should I use an encrypted email product or a free email product? And again, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those practical constraints. Well, how am I using the product? But for the most part, when possible, we want to choose a product that is encrypted, designed for healthcare. Am I saying you could never use a free email? There's no circumstance? Not necessarily, but the standard guidance, those usual guidance you're going to receive, is to select something encrypted over a free product. Again, we want to make sure that the product we use has clear policies and offers that business associates agreement. Do they have a frequently asked question, section of their website that addresses the concerns of healthcare providers? Or are you having to go dig through the website and tiny print to find the answers? For me, that's pretty central as to who they serve and where does it rank in terms of what they think is important. And then I'm really going to read my user agreement and understand that messaging product. Who can see the data? Where is it stored? And again, what happens if I choose to use a different product? Many of us may have old lingering email accounts in the world, perhaps an AOL account if you're my age or older, or perhaps a Yahoo account when they were the vogue. Perhaps we're still using them. They're still pretty good. But many of us may have transitioned over the time to a Gmail account, to an Outlook account, and so forth. Those accounts are still somewhere in the ether. So it's not as if our stopping using them necessarily results in the tidy deletion and organization of that data. So for those free email products, it's less of an issue because typically those are personal communications or those are, ads we receive and so forth. But for a product that we're using to connect with clients about, talk about protected health information, this is of central importance. We want to understand, where does that information go and how is it stored? How is it maintained over time? Do we have the opportunity to delete it where it is truly deleted, to download it, to store it in accordance with the regulations that we're given in our jurisdiction and in accordance with our APA record keeping and guidelines. So we want to make sure that we are not bound by the product, but rather bound by the regulations and ethics that govern us. Okay, let's talk about that business associates agreement. So again, this is that contract between a HIPAA compliant entity, that's us as psychologists, and an individual or a business who's providing a service. And I want to note there is a template offered through the Office of Health and Human Services, and I think we have a link to offer in the chat. If you're interested, please go ahead and copy that link and put it somewhere. This is a customizable template that you can use to design a BAA for vendors you work with if they don't offer one themselves. Now, I'll share with you anecdotally that vendors have typically limited appetite to learn about the BAAs that we have to offer them. Usually, a large-scale vendor will want to use the BAA that they have designed, and there's little opportunity to comment on it or change it. But in those instances where we want to use a service, a BAA isn't offered, it's nice to have one of our own. So some of those standard components would cover themes such as, we're defining terms. This, again, is a very jargon-heavy space. They're talking about how they're using protected health information and when, how, if they disclose protected health information. They talk about safeguards in place to ensure that information is treated appropriately, disclosures regarding if something was breached or not treated appropriately, and how they would handle that situation. In the news this year, we've seen quite a few circumstances in which there was a breach of some sort. There was a very large scale, very public health insurance breach in which client information was leaked. And the handling of that, I think, was almost as big a news as what happened, secondary to the breach. So we want to make sure that we are partnered with an entity that understands its responsibilities and how to discharge those duties. We want to know if they're auditing this information and who does that. Do they have subcontractors who are poking around in our data? And if so, how do they think about that? How do they vet it? How do they handle the information broadly? Okay, so there's that business associates agreement. Again, there should be a link in the chat if you'd like to go ahead and look at that template and perhaps customize something that would work well for you. Okay, so those are the usual suspects, those type of recommendations you would get often if you speak to a consultant, if you speak to a risk manager. Let's talk a little bit about the practical. And this dips, for me, for those of us who have a clinical aspect of our practice, into the clinical as well. How am I using a technology? So why am I using a technology? We're going to talk in a moment a little bit about specific applications of asynchronous messaging here as well. So we talked about the usual. We're going to talk about the practical with regard to asynchronous messaging. So why do I want to use asynchronous messaging? And how often do I think I'm actually going to do this? What features are going to make this a good fit for my practice versus bad fit? And how easy is the product to use for you and for your clients? I have sort of a story that I like to share. I'll share in a moment, but I've iterated through a few of these secondary to the gift of feedback from my clients as to which were easy and which weren't. And of course, what are the costs? Increasingly, this is a feature we see integrated into a lot of products designed for healthcare. But the costs can add up. So if we're paying for an electronic medical record and an encrypted messaging service and an encrypted text service, for example, these costs can accumulate. So we want to be thoughtful, not just about the individual costs, but how it fits together in the larger scope of what we're paying for our practice. Okay, so very concretely, let's talk again about asynchronous messaging. We talked about the usual pieces of guidance. Let's talk about some of that practical information. So how do I want to message with my patients or clients? Again, a reasonable position is to say, well, I don't want to. They can call me on the telephone. Historically, HIPAA had very permissive rules regarding telephone. That's changed a little bit as most telephone these days is internet enabled. It's gotten a little more complicated, but historically, telephone was the less complicated technology to use. But increasingly, many patients do have the expectation of being able to reach us, not just on the telephone. So many again, it is a reasonable position to say, well, where my risk tolerance is no, I don't want to do this. But many of us, and I would even say at this point, the data say most of us choose to have some capacity to have asynchronous messaging with our client. So I want to encourage us to think through, how will I use this technology in my practice? Is this something I'll discuss administrative issues with my client? So scheduling, I'm running 5 minutes late. Here's the homework we talked about. Well, if we do that latter, it actually starts to dip into some of the clinical content. Can a client text me, email me, message me if they're feeling an increase in symptoms, if they're having problems completing the homework for a specific reason? All of these kind of dig into questions of appropriate use. Will this be included in my record? My medical record is a question I commonly hear, and my counsel always is yes, especially if there's anything clinical. Transparently, in my practice, if someone emails me and says, Dr. Sarah, I want to move my appointment to next Tuesday, well, that's probably not going in my record. I actually use an integrated product that makes it very easy to put everything in the record. So technically speaking, it's all there in one place. But there's also a feature where I can very easily copy and paste it into the actual notes, into the chart. So how easy is it to integrate information? Certainly if someone sends me a message that says, Dr. Sarah, I'm really worried about X, Y, or Z, or this homework has been really difficult, or even if they're running late, because over time that can be clinically significant as well, that's something I want to put in the record. So how easy is that to do? Am I having to toggle between 3 different systems to get that message into the record, or is it quite easy? Is it quite integrated? These are some of those practical aspects. If I intend to do this routinely with clients, I know many people who, for example, offer dialectical behavior therapy or DBT. Asynchronous communication is a big part of the work itself. I will really need something, in the tools that serve my practice that facilitates this. Let's say I have a very different practice where it's just, not very common. That's going to be much less of a need. So again, there's no one size fits all answer. We want to think through the practical needs of your practice. Is this something that you do routinely and you really need a solution for? Or is this really a one-off thing that you just need every once in a blue moon? And I think each of these are going to inform how much am I willing to invest in this. Again, we can pay for products that offer some of those features that we've discussed, and we'll dig into a little bit more in a moment, or we can use a free product. I will say, as probably no surprise to anyone here, there seems to be an inverse relationship between the cost of the product and the security features they offer. So what type of features are we talking about? Typically, we want to find a product that offers us encryption. We want to find a product that offers us some ability to control who sees what. What do I mean by this? If I have an email that offers quote unquote encryption, that means, that they are encrypting the data as they transmit it. It's no guarantee that I don't send it to your unencrypted Gmail and you don't have someone read over your shoulder and read it. Most information breaches that happen are not very high tech. They're very low tech. Somebody forwards a message or somebody plays something aloud, someone reads over a shoulder. Those are much more common vectors of information security issues than grand data breaches we hear about on the news. So having a product that offers some control there, can be very valuable. I'll mention that in my own practice, I initially used an encrypted email product. It was encrypted on the back end, as is appropriate, but it also had this kind of front end protection. And by that, I mean that when I sent an email, the recipient of that email would have to log in to a special portal to read the email. This went over like a lead balloon in my practice. I can tell you, I received vigorous and robust and copious feedback. The clients didn't like it. They said it was too cumbersome, it was difficult, it was annoying. They had to get a profile to log in. It was really a hassle. So I disabled that feature, and ultimately this nudged me to go to a product that was actually integrated into my electronic medical record. That cost a little bit more. But for me, the trade-offs were worth it. This is something I do all the time. My risk tolerance is in a place where I really value privacy, security, confidentiality. It's really, really important to me. I do this work for a living. So I want to be a good role model in what I use. So for me, the juice was worth the squeeze. I invested in a product, that would handle this issue. But I also integrated the information that I got from my clients saying, this is too hard to use. We don't like it. I also like those products that don't allow clients to forward them to everyone, like, hey, listen to what my therapist had to say, and will discourage you generally from putting all that much interesting information in those asynchronous messages. The simpler we keep it, I think, the simpler our lives will be. Okay. And this brings me to kind of the reality check of, a perfect solution may not be available. To me, the asynchronous messaging example is a really good one. To me, the best solution is have an encrypted product that has them log in through a portal, where they can read the message and it's quite secure. I think that's the highest standard for data security. It's the highest standard for privacy and confidentiality. It was absolutely not user-friendly, and frankly, for many of my clients, just unusable. So I had to balance what I thought was good risk management with what was practical and patient-centered. Now, always I'm keeping in mind, what does regulation tell me? What does my jurisdiction tell me? How does my ethics code and my telepsychology guidelines guide me? However, within that wiggle, I was able to make a compromise that tended to work well. And I think we need to be very transparent with our clients regarding when we're making those compromises and how they might impact their privacy, their confidentiality, their information security, because at the end of the day, this is their informed consent. And so anytime we're doing an informed consent process, we talk about risks and benefits, right? So let's say, for example, since we're talking about asynchronous communication, I'm trying to decide whether or not to use text to communicate with a client. Now, text is incredibly convenient. People really like text. They like to use it, especially for administrative concerns like running 5 minutes late. It's easy to use. Most people have a mobile device. There's a lot of opportunity to get the information in real time. They're incredibly hard to integrate into the electronic medical record. They're incredibly easy to be overseen. There's very poor privacy and confidentiality because this is typically sitting out on someone's phone. Many of us have settings where text pop up to the screen. There's a lot of challenges with text. There are products that offer encrypted text services. They are not wildly popular. They tend to be on the pricier side. And when clients say they want to text with their provider, they don't mean I want to log into an encrypted text program and use it. What they're really saying is I want to use it for my phone. Some products have bridged this gap more smoothly than others, I will acknowledge. But I will say, just anecdotally, most people aren't using those encrypted text programs, even though I think they're great. Most people are just using text. In that case, we need to be very thoughtful about informed consent. Oh, and I'll mention, text is free typically, whereas these other products are not. So in informed consent, this would be an opportunity to discuss the pros and cons, whether it's email, whether it's text, letting folks know, hey, what you're gaining is this ease of use. What you're losing is, the highest standards available for privacy confidentiality. And what I, as a practitioner, am losing is, the highest standard that I can offer in terms of privacy and confidentiality. The highest standard might be not doing it at all. So I think, again, we want to think through how we're going to use it. We want to talk about those compromises with our clients after we decide what we're willing to do. And we want to discuss what specific products we are and are not using and what types of information, how we're going to use that. Because anybody who texts with a client can tell you they have likely received a text that they were like, oh gosh, it's outside the boundaries. I can tell my client, please only text me with administrative information. That's the type of information appropriate, for this milieu. It is no guarantee that that is how they use the technology. And anecdotally, I can share, I've received texts, that have what I think are clinically relevant pieces of information. Now, in those instances, I have to decide how I'm going to respond. For me, if there's any emergent circumstance or content, of course, I'm responding as I would to any emergency with haste, and making sure it's a priority to connect with them and see how they're doing. If, however, I'm receiving something that's just, commentary on the weather today or something that I feel is out of bounds of how we've agreed to use it, I'm going to think about whether or not I respond and how I respond eventually. These types of things are piece of information I put in my informed consent document. In a moment, I will offer you some links to informed consent templates offered through the trust that I think outline some of these themes about how to deal with different technologies in your practice. But I encourage each of us discuss and document. And again, this is an ongoing assessment. I'm certainly doing this at the onset of care when I am starting with a new client, But additionally, I'm thinking through anytime I add a technology to my practice. I think in the next couple of years, goodness, there's going to be a lot of AI products that may be relevant to my practice, and I'm going to have to determine whether or not I use them, which clients I think would be appropriate to use them with, which not. And I think I'm going to need to update and have additional conversation with my clients to ensure that my informed consent process, keeps pace with what I'm actually doing in my practice, and that each of my clients has been well informed regarding the risks, the benefits, and had an opportunity to give their feedback. Okay. When we're thinking about risk management and your specific needs here, we want to think about your jurisdiction because this greatly informs things, right? We want to ask your board. Folks who are living in California, that explicitly lists text, for example, as a possible technology to communicate with clients. Other jurisdictions do not opine in this way. We want to ask a risk manager. The trust has its advocate service. We want to walk through, well, I'm thinking about using this product. Here's the pros and cons. Having someone to consult with is incredibly valuable. What are the recommended best practices? We have at the trust, we have the risk management roundtables, we have the telehealth community chats. These are opportunities to join a forum, ask really specific questions. Hopefully others have questions that are similar to yours, and have this opportunity to engage in a larger conversation about your jurisdiction, your practice specifically. Ask an attorney in your jurisdiction to review your policies, to have a conversation about, well, what are the laws that affect me? Some feedback I get in the telehealth community chats, which is very valid frequently, is, well, gosh, that's really expensive. And I totally agree. And I'm never suggesting that we run off every time we have a question to consult the attorney every day. But for me, I batch up my questions. And every 2 years, I'll tell you, I talk to my attorney here in Washington State. They know the law. They're incredibly facile with kind of the intersection of technology and healthcare and the law. And they can help educate me as well as review my policies to make sure I remain on track. It is expensive to do. I will mention that my state psychological association offers a benefit that's helpful. The results may vary in terms of your jurisdiction and what's offered, but it's worthy of investigation. And I really encourage folks to consider this a cost of doing business, especially if you're using technology in your practice. Again, not all the time because it is costly, but every once in a while, making sure that you're having a review, especially if you change and adopt new technologies and you change your policies. Okay, being cognizant of those laws that govern us all. So those federal laws such as HIPAA, high tech, having to do with information security, the laws of your jurisdiction. For example, any opinions from your board or any laws from your state. In Washington State, we have laws specific to telehealth, and our board has, our psychology board, I should say, has opined regarding video conferencing and its ethical use. Not every state does, but these are the types of things which are going to make your risk, it's going to inform your thinking about your risk tolerance, your practice, and what technologies you're comfortable adopting versus what you might not be. Again, making sure you have that information about who you could talk to in terms of your risk management questions, an attorney that you value. And then CE, this is a very rich area for CE. We have tons of continuing education opportunities here, and really encourage folks, we need to get CE anyway to maintain our licensure. So, make sure that included, just as we get an ethics CE regularly, make sure you have some technology CE in there. I'm not saying they're always the most stunningly exciting. I'm hoping today is at least modestly exciting. But, make sure that that's part of the diet that you're feeding yourself in terms of keeping up your competencies. Okay, so let's go back to our asynchronous messaging question and think about our individual risk tolerances. So, okay, maybe I've decided I want to focus on administrative issues. That's one way I'm going to manage my risks. I'm not really comfortable with some of those clinical themes that we talked about when I'm messaging asynchronously. And I'm going to think about how I want to respond if it's used inappropriately. Well, let's say if someone sends me content that I think is not appropriate for that milieu, unless there's an emergency, I'm going to not respond until the next time we have a meeting that's live, and then we can talk about the use and kind of return to those guidelines that we set jointly. Now, if someone continues to misuse it and they just, are sending me an update on the weather every day, Well, I may let them know that we're no longer going to use this modality in our work together. Not as a punishment per se, but just to say, I don't think this is working for the type of communication that you're wanting to have. Let's think about what would work. Is there a way that you can write this information down as it occurs to you and then share it with me during our in-person sessions, during our video conferencing sessions, so forth. So thinking through, how do I want to manage my own risk and what are the boundaries I'm going to set? Let's say I want to use email over integrated messaging. Maybe I don't have any electronic health record, or my product that I use doesn't offer one. Well, okay, this is going to be a higher risk decision for me. So I'm going to have to think about how I manage it, because typically something that's integrated into that electronic medical record is going to offer a little bit more security. Well, I'm definitely going to want to select an encrypted product. I'm going to select a product that offers that business associates agreement, make sure it's designed for healthcare. And I'm going to tell my client, I've made this decision to let us communicate asynchronously, not through, a portal, but through, let's say, email. And here's what we're giving up, and here's what we're gaining. And make sure that we're having this discussion, we're documenting that discussion. And in doing this, I'm kind of bringing it all together, my risk tolerance, those usual guidelines, and the practical aspects of how I practice and how I want to practice. Okay. We're doing well on time. Okay. So I wanted to put together some resources. As I go through here, there's going to be a lot of links in the chat. I encourage you, if this sounds like a resource you would like to use, please take a moment, copy and paste it for later in use. There'll be more than anybody wants to review probably live at this moment, but let's spend a little bit of time talking about them. So I'm going to offer you a mix of practical, regulatory, and ethical resources. And I want to start with the Trust, who's hosting our webinar today. The Trust offers what we call the Telehealth Competencies Credential in collaboration with the National Register. This is a series of courses designed towards elevating psychologists' sort of core competencies in telepsychology and in technology use as well, but primarily oriented towards the delivery of services via telehealth technologies. This is a series of classes that one can do online. You get a certificate at the end. It gives you a great deal of CE, and you'll emerge with a pretty solid understanding of what influences this type of risk management decision-making. We also at the Trust have a document library. We're going to go through some of those documents in a moment, but that offers themes such as a consent form for telepsychology, consent form for neurotelepsychology, consent form for walk and talk therapy, you name it. They have a great deal of resource there. I encourage you to take a look at it. We have our advocate service, I've heard referred to as the crown jewel of the risk management program, which I think is really charming and accurate. This is an opportunity to set a one-on-one call with a trained risk manager who can walk through your specific concerns for your practice. These folks are incredibly well-trained, incredibly knowledgeable regarding the intersection of ethical technology use and evidence-based practice. They're an amazing resource, and they're free with your Trust policy. So if you haven't, I would encourage you to make a list of questions and set some time with one of our risk advocates. The telehealth community chats I co-host with my colleague, Dr. Margot Adams-Larson. We talk about themes of telepsychology as well as technology generally. We try to answer questions that emerge. It's a more informal sort of chat-based format. And I will say, any question we don't get to during the live webinar, we always read, and we try to address when it occurs enough. We try to make sure that we're answering, themes that folks are interested in the next chat. And our risk management roundtables, very similar format, where we have our risk managers who are staffing our advocate service come speak live about the themes that are topical currently and answer live questions from attendees. So they're great resources and great ways to dig into what is relevant for your practice. I want to mention some of those professional resources offered through some of our professional organizations, such as the American Psychological Association. We have our telepsychology guidelines, the first of which came out in 2013. I had the pleasure of serving on that committee along with members from APA, the Trust, and ASPPB. That series of guidelines was updated. I had the pleasure of chairing that revision that passed this last summer at APA convention. Now, while not exclusive, while we're talking about technology more broadly, technology is a major theme in those telepsychology guidelines. If you've not had a chance to look at them, I'd take a look at them, especially, with our new updates. They really tried to address some of the staggering changes that happened over the last decade since, or actually 12 years since those first guidelines were published. Our APA ethics code, and I will mention the forthcoming revision. We'll talk about technology notably. So again, I think as a profession, we're stepping up, we're thinking about resources for psychologists to help guide the profession in ethical technology use. I always like to mention the American Telemedicine Association. They have a special interest group dedicated to telemental health and technology themes, and they offer some really very practical, useful resources around setting up with video conferencing and just some of the nuts and bolts sort of mechanics of getting started in telepsychology as well as ethical technology use. And again, you'll see some of those links in the chat. Encourage folks to find that group of colleagues. Who are the folks you know who are interested in these themes? Perhaps you find them through established listservs, maybe through an APA division, through a SIG group for American Telemedicine Association and so forth, organizations dedicated to telehealth technology. Some of our trust community opportunities connect you with other people in your community who are interested in these themes. So taking those moments to find out who the other folks who are talking about this is, be it live, be it over listserv, and making sure you have a connection that if you have a question that emerges, you have a trusted colleague you can ask. I'd like to mention some of those national resources, the Department of Health and Human Services, the National Telehealth Technology Assessment Resource Center. I did a series of trainings for them focused on technology competencies. Both of these websites have great resources. They're free. Encourage you to take a look. Okay. If you find jargon that you wonder what the heck this means, I encourage you to check out the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. It is great when reading those user agreements. If you're like, my goodness, what is this word even? It's very accessible, very user-friendly, and consistently updated. So really has the most up-to-date language and treatment of these terms. Healthit.gov similarly offers kind of a how-to around technology infrastructure questions. And then Capterra.com is a website that offers reviews of softwares. So it's very, has a strong orientation around healthcare. So you can go in and check out those types of products that are relevant to our practice and see what other users have to say. Think of it like a Yelp for healthcare software. Okay, so we're getting down to it. Let's take everything we've talked about today, those usual recommendations, those practical clinical recommendations, and kind of an examination of our own risk tolerance, and apply them to our friend, Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock wants to offer a few video conferencing sessions to a traveling client. Doesn't really want to become a telepsychologist at any real scale, although I would tell Dr. Spock that if they're going to pick up the telephone, they are a telepsychologist. Wants to use a free video conferencing product, probably, but isn't sure. So I'm going to ask you, in light of what we've spoken about today, take a moment and put in the chat, what should Dr. Spock be thinking about? What are some of those considerations? Anything you think that Dr. Spock should be sure to check on, just go ahead and put it in the chat. All right, well, let's kind of give the roundup of what maybe Dr. Spock should be thinking about. So first of all, why? Why does Dr. Spock want to do this? Is this client traveling, and are they going to be traveling regularly? Is this client moving? Are they within the jurisdiction? Are they outside of the jurisdiction? What services is Dr. Spock going to offer? Is this something that they're going to have regular psychotherapy meetings? Is this something where they're doing a quick check-in for administrative purposes? This is going to guide what product might be best. Is this a class that Dr. Spock is offering? Is this, something that is going to have protected health information covered? In these instances, this is going to help guide Dr. Spock. Where is he located? In some jurisdictions, the board's going to offer you guidance on video conferencing, and others, they do not. Are we traveling across jurisdictions? Because that has a whole other series of implications. So where will the client be located? And then some clinical considerations. Is this an appropriate technology for the type of work Dr. Spock's doing for their client's facility with technology, and frankly, what their client wants, because that's incredibly important. Is this a product that's free but designed for healthcare? They're out there. And do they offer that business associates agreement? And most importantly, does Dr. Spock have informed consent for this type of care? Has he discussed this with his client, explained the risks, the benefits, and how they're going to use it together? Well, we're about at that time. We're going to take a moment and open up to any questions that might have emerged during our time together.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah Smucker-Barnwell. Yes, we did get several questions during your talk. Why don't we start with a question about the business associate agreement and specifically about Zoom. I think some people have had issues with Zoom. This person in particular would like to address confidentiality concerns with Zoom. Their own personal experience was that Zoom was very resistant to speaking with anyone about a BAA. And uh, also, another issue about Zoom was the inability to limit them saving and sharing information and client data. They do not appear to inherently protect confidentiality on the therapist and or the client's end. So, do you have any? I could go on, but do you have any general comments about Zoom and pitfalls of Zoom?
I do. Yeah, it's a great question as well. And I'm taking us up, I'll put us back on our final landing slide, but I thought as long as we're talking, let's just have big faces and talk. I think one of the things, this is a really great example. What a nice example of the manner in which we want to look for that product design for healthcare. Zoom does offer a product called, not very creatively, Zoom for Healthcare. And Zoom for Healthcare offers, ironically, fewer features at a slightly higher cost. So basically, it turns off those features that are most problematic for a HIPAA covered entity. They do offer a business associates agreement. It is not the easiest thing in the world to come by. So it is one of those things where so many people like and are familiar with Zoom that I'll tell you, as a healthcare provider, I have a Zoom for Healthcare account. I don't use it as much as I use, I'm a nerd for these things, so I have about 4 different products, but the one I use the most is the one integrated into my electronic medical record, because that's just very simple. But people really like Zoom. And I end up in circumstances where, I want to set the terms and set the privacy and confidentiality level for the meetings I'm in. So I go ahead and I pay my subscription for Zoom for Healthcare, which has fewer features. Before this call, we were talking a little bit about some of the upcoming AI transcription features for Zoom. Zoom for Healthcare won't have that. It won't have some of those other sort of snazzy bells and whistles that Zoom for Business does. But that's because they're a HIPAA, they're HIPAA compliant. So my best answer to that is to probably bite the bullet and to pay the subscription fee for Zoom for Healthcare. Now, if somebody said, I really don't want to do that, this isn't something I do very often, it doesn't make sense for me. There are other products. I believe Doxy.me still has a free version. There are some others out in the marketplace that offer a free version now. Will they be free next week? Will they be HIPAA compliant next week? That I cannot promise. But I do think that there are solutions out there that are low cost or free that aren't Zoom, that are user friendly. But if you're doing this on any real scale, either using the product that's integrated into your electronic health record, because it tends to be awfully darn convenient for those clinical contexts, or paying for Zoom for Healthcare is probably a worthy investment.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me this is an easy question about HIPAA. Do HIPAA regulations apply to practices that are entirely cash-based, no insurance accepted at all?
Oh my goodness. So this was something I encourage you to go to, I believe it was the last telehealth community chat, which is available on demand, where Dr. Margot Adams Larson digs into this. There's a lot of controversy here, and I'm remiss to opine, if I'm really honest. This is where I would ask a risk manager.
Yeah.
It's about technology. I'm your gal. There are many that argue. Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe we should go back to a technology question. I thought I'd throw that one at you just
yeah. I'll say there are many that argue no. I tend to err on the side of like, oh, when it comes to this sort of thing. So I'll bring it back to technology.
Okay.
I would encourage you to talk to answer the larger question. I would talk to a risk manager. There are many people who say no. I'm just not like so steadfast in my belief in that I'm going to say no on this webinar. As far as technology is concerned, I just see no downside to using the HIPAA compliant products, because at this point, after what COVID, brought into the marketplace, there are so many choices that are HIPAA compliant, and they're easy to use and they're low cost, that for me, I'm kind of like, well, gosh, yeah, we could use a not HIPAA compliant product, but Google has a HIPAA compliant product for email. Microsoft has an email HIPAA compliant. There's so many video conferencing ones now that are HIPAA compliant that there's just limited upside.
Right.
Maybe there's a loophole there, maybe there's not, but for my world, I'd go with the HIPAA compliant one every time.
Okay. Thanks.
That's my risk tolerance speaking. So.
Let's moving from BAA and HIPAA to encryption and asynchronous messaging. Okay, so here's someone whose spouse works in cybersecurity and recommended
Amazing.
that he use a VPN as
Mm-hmm.
well as a randomized Wi-Fi MAC address. But in the space that he's in, the landlord requires that he use a fixed Wi-Fi MAC address, and the telehealth platforms seldom work properly when connected to the VPN. So the question is, if a breach should happen, will he be held liable even though he cannot utilize the highest levels of security due to these requirements and circumstances?
It's a great example. I mean, so two thoughts occur. One, this is exactly the type of thing I'd put in my informed consent document. But this is a known, just this is the way it is for me to do business. Like this is how it has to be because of the landlord. It's a great example. That's something I would have in my informed consent document. I would try to make that language as accessible as possible. This is someone who's obviously very knowledgeable about these themes, and I would just say, hey, here's the risks, here's the benefits, and make sure that folks know that. That's my first starter. Second is, I think, what are our greatest opportunities for breach? Certainly, can I get some kind of malware that goes on my computer and spies on me? It could happen. The more often things we see happen at the enterprise level. So if if the company I'm using, the electronic medical record, if that's integrated, the video conferencing product, that liability will reside with them for disclosure. That if they are where the breach happened, that liability resides with them. For example, I think that the Change Healthcare is a really good example one. Like the liability it was very confusing as to who was responsible for that. So I think the probability of you having a problem is low. I would put it in the informed consent document. The higher probability is one of your vendor partners has an issue, in which case, I would make sure, I would always err on the side of disclosure. So if one of my vendor partners had a breach, it's the type of thing I would mention to clients. I probably have no way of knowing who was affected by the breach and who wasn't. Technically, a lot of that legal requirement resides with the company that had the breach, but as a HIPAA covered entity, I'm required for notification. So it's a little tricky. I would definitely put it in my informed consent document. If I was aware of a breach, I would disclose it. I think your probability of a problem sounds pretty low to me.
Okay, and here's a good question, I think, about in practice when things go awry, right? We believe in technology, but it often fails us. How should psychologists handle technical challenges or failures with digital tools during client sessions?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. I don't know, with humor and humility, it happens. This is where I think if you're going to use a technology routinely in practice, redundancy is incredibly valuable. If you are using video conferencing, have a backup video conferencing product. Choose one of the free ones that are HIPAA compliant that you'll use in a pinch. If your internet goes out, as part of your informed consent process, I'll tell you, as part of my informed consent process, I tell folks, hey, we're in a video conferencing meetings. If the internet goes out, I'm going to call you. Let's make sure I have a number on file, which I would for safety planning anyway. But I want to let folks know if then, this. If the power goes out and we can't video conference, I'm going to call you. If Zoom is just having a wiggy, weird day, here's the other product we're going to use. So, just kind of having some redundancy in products if we're routinely using them, and then kind of a failure mode plan. And then I find that when, things go relatively smoothly and you have a plan and you're just kind of upfront and honest about, gosh, sorry, the internet is funky today and I will figure out why, but I want to make sure our care moves forward as much as I can. People tend to be very gracious and understanding because they're living in the same world with the same technology challenges. I tend to find that clients respond very well to forethought and planning. And then if we're just honest and candid and maybe a little bit of levity in the mix, it tends to go okay.